G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day, and I will say today I'm feeling a fair bit better than I did yesterday, and hopefully this trajectory keeps going and we get better and better for the next few weeks. It's going to be a big couple of weeks as Mr. Trump, of course, comes into the White House this time next week. But of course, today we have a lot to catch up on, not only from today's news about strikes and maps, but of course what we missed yesterday because I had to run off camera and maybe stick my head in the toilet bowl. So we'll go over, of course, the gas, and of one good thing that has delayed us till today is there's been more come from Robert Fico, the leader, of course, of Slovakia, and the leader of Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky, about gas into the EU. But I'm also going to share with you from our doctor, Richard Connolly, of course, who the interview about economics and Eastern European economies was with, which will be linked below if you'd like to see that. It's only a couple of weeks old, but I've asked him about the pipeline that Ukraine has cut off running into Slovakia and what effect this will have on Russia, on Ukraine, and the EU, and potential long-term effects too. So we'll go over that. We'll go over more evidence of North Koreans operating in Kursk, maps and strikes as we normally do. But with the maps, I want to add a little bit of perspective to a couple of areas also. And we're going to start with the strikes. I was going to say we'll start with the maps, but we'll start with the strikes. Now, Ukraine has had large missile and drone attacks into multiple regions of Russia overnight. So there was drones go into Tula overnight, and this is just a video of one of them being successfully intercepted, but there were multiple strikes. There's also strikes on oil facilities around Engels as well. And in Bryansk, a chemical plant has gone up in flames, and this is reportedly from ATACMS Storm Shadows with a mixture of drones. And we will see this the same as how Russia does missile and drone attacks, drone waves to come in, distract some of the AD, and then you send your cruise missiles in. So we've seen multiple strikes overnight. What is the effect of these? Well, over the next couple of days, if we do see large effects, I will share that with you, but the real effect of strikes comes in the weeks or months after, when we get an idea of, are there shortages of petroleum products? Are there shortages of weapon systems? Like when we saw those massive, spectacular bangs of artillery, munitions, and other sorts of munitions going up, we said, well, we see the spectacular, massive explosion. Wait a few weeks and we'll get an idea if it's going to affect the front lines. That's the best way to measure this. But I talk a lot about fiber optically controlled drones and how they are having a large influence on the battlefield and battlefields in the future. So this came out from a Russian page, and I'll show you the footage in a second. Thermal images with the ability to switch to daytime camera were delivered to fiber optic drones. From this, not exactly new technology, but for this drone, of course, it is a novelty. Expect full high definition footage of strikes on then Ukrainian armoured vehicles. It's from a Russian page. Remember, Russians are operating the most amount of fibre optic drones on the battlefield at this point in time, and I think it is in Ukraine's interest to try and get that as soon as possible, seeing how many successful strikes we are seeing with these. But this isn't just novelty, this ability to switch between. I think this is going to be more of an effect on a fibre optic drone than it may be on a radio controlled drone. Radio controlled drones, if you're flying along and you choose to go into a large, underground area, whether you're down into a mine, you're into a building, radio controls, that's where you have a lot of limitations, not just in a little bit, but I'm meaning like a long way in a building. You have limitations there because of radio frequencies and the power of it, where fiber optic controlled drones do not have that. And I've spoken about the amount of underground areas in areas like, say, Odessa. We know that there's massive underground areas we saw in Mariupol, in Bakhmut, in Avdiivka, the mine sitting around Pokrovsk, that the ability to switch between this could be very effective when going underground, where a fiber optic controlled drone will not lose its feed. And you can see this footage isn't fantastic of this, but you can get a somewhat of an idea. It hits this loaf vehicle here, and on the footage you can see both the like normal video, very dark, and then the thermal video too, and you can tell the typical outline here of the fiber optically controlled drones. You can see this footage being shared. So I think that's not just novelty. I think that has real world effect. Now, let's go on to the maps and have a look at what is changing. So, of course, we have Ukraine in the center, the capital of Kyiv. Red areas occupied since 22. The purple occupied since 2014. The red check indicating Russia, a ground that Russia has made in the past 24 hours. But all but one area, and this is a little bit cheeky. So we'll come down Velika Novosibirsk. Now, what did we share yesterday that Suryak Maps said? Suryak Maps has said that Neshkunchny in here has effectively come under Russian occupation. And we said this map may not want to show this because this is turning back the gains that Ukraine made, the costly gains in their 2023 counteroffensive. Now you can see the other gains here are in red check. There's another red gain in here, but it's not indicated, if we step back and then to today, by red check, which should indicate a today's gain. Could this be incorrect? Could it just be a coincidence? Well, I don't know. I'll leave that up to you. We did say that yesterday. Go back on the video. So let's have a look at this. And how do we know that the Russians are there? Well, we have this footage here of a Russian national flag being flown in the destroyed area here. Of course, there's been fights all through this both ways. That is right down in here. Again, it's not marked in check. And we have Velika Novosibirsk, Suryak map. Today, of course, this is in this exact area. See where this cuts back in on this road and up around? So he showed that yesterday, so he's not showing it today. But Suryak is showing in the north, further down, where these two roads have been cut off. He's showing that the Russians have had a southerly push in this direction from Novye Komar, which we see on this map. There is some red check today. So this is an area that we really, really do need to keep an eye on, as Velika Novosibirsk is currently getting enveloped. We know that's the way Russians like to fight, but also Ukraine will not want to leave this regional hub for the south at this point in time. So there'll be a real battle over this, we believe. So just keep that in mind. But before we move on to the maps, I want to talk about one great decision that Ukraine has made. We talk a lot about attritional war and attritional war, protracted war doctrine on this channel. And Tatarigami UA, I think one of the best bloggers throughout this entire conflict, has said, according to Ukrainian journalist Yuri Batsov, President Zelensky has reportedly halted sending people to new brigades, redirecting recruits instead of experienced combat units. If true, this is an excellent decision. It is an excellent decision. A good reminder why public discussion was necessary. And Tatarigami UA brings up the same point I do. If you want to have change, it needs to come to the forefront. And there's no better disinfectant than sunlight, or sunlight is the best disinfectant, however the quote goes. And I believe this is true, and I would say that he has been very successful in this positive change, because this change is in line with attritional warfare doctrine, because what you want to do is let experience proliferate throughout units. So you put new guys in experienced units. That unit should never drop below the quoted 70% strength. It should never drop below that, because if it does, you're just losing experience. You have new recruits go in there, new conscripts go in there, and experience is allowed to proliferate and grow, rather than pulling guys out of units and just re-raising completely new brigades, which we have seen the failure of, like the 155th with 1,500 plus guys literally walking out of the unit. But one thing this doesn't solve is it doesn't solve the manpower problems that Ukraine is having. So National Security Advisor under Biden, of course, Jake Sullivan, who people honestly believe he's working for the Kremlin, and that's just ridiculous. But because if you have any criticism, that's apparently what you're doing. But he says, we have to recognise that manpower issues has become more acute over the past year. We didn't hide our position on that. But let's see what happens in the future. We've made it clear that manpower is indeed a concern in Ukraine, which they will have to address. But in the end, it's their sovereign decision. Now, of course, this is talking about very low recruitment numbers, difficulty conscripting, mobilising, and of course, that age of mobilisation is at 25, not at what the US would like to see, drop down to 18. But there are acute manpower issues. This isn't just caused by weapons not being delivered. It can be caused by poor outcomes on the front line. As we see that moving further and further, we can see also the attitude of some of the recruiters and some of the territorial guards who go and grab these guys literally off the street. All of this has an effect on this. So it's not just the US to blame. So let's talk further about then mobilisation ages and recruitment problems. Mark Waltz, a former Green Beret and combat veteran in Afghanistan, who he's going to be then under Trump as national security advisor. So similarly, I'm showing you from Biden and now from the Trump administration, suggested the expanded draft eligibility would help Ukraine overcome a shortage of troops. Ukraine has persistently struggled with manpower while fighting the full-scale invasion, saying one of the things that we'll be asking of the Ukrainians is they have real manpower issues. Their draft age right now is 26, not 18. He's somewhat incorrect because it's down at 25, but it's just people get things wrong all the time. I don't think a lot of people realise that they could generate hundreds of thousands of new soldiers. The thing is with this, and he knows this, is that this is still going to take, in my opinion, a minimum of 12 to 18 months. And I think General Zaluzny, who is incredibly popular, was completely correct when over a year ago he said we need to mobilise 500,000 now, or at least it was rumoured that he had said that. Then he goes, it's about seeing the front line stabilised so that we can enter into some type of deal. And I say the reason in this is because if the front isn't stabilised and the front is moving in Russia's favour, why at this point would Putin negotiate? And if he did come to the table to negotiate, why would it be the front line sitting right now whilst he's still advancing? So there's all things that need to come into consideration. There's a hell of a lot of considerations here, and you can't just have your own considerations. So we have, of course, not a war mapper, but we have Deep State up until the 14th of January. They have occupied a further 123 kilometre squares. Now, one thing I want to say in this is I think there's this idea that these advances are just through open paddocks, a couple of tree lines and some villages. These kilometres are not just through open paddocks and no man's land. This is through fortified defensive areas, through incredibly important areas, every metre, every kilometre here. The gains we saw that went from Avdiivka to now where the front line is currently at this point, this is not just through paddocks. This is some 55 kilometres minimum of advancement through multiple defensive lines. This isn't just through nothing, as some would like to paint the picture of this. And this is further going to be seen when we zoom in now on Kurakhove and add some further perspective to the maps. So what we can see here is Shevchenko. There is then a Russian advancement from Stary Terny all the way toward Andriivka. Now, before we get into what a video I want to show here, Deep State did report that Ukraine did take back some of the ground here, being shown by this movement on the map today. Okay, ignore just north of here for a second. And what I say about this advancement is not just through open fields. We get footage like this. This is coming out from Russian soldiers said to be on the Andriivka front, which Andriivka is this next major town here, of course, coming from Shevchenko at this point. And you can see that these aren't just open fields. This is major fortified, dug in, reinforced positions that are being taken underground. This is not nothing. This is very significant, and it's areas like this that are coming under control. And the problem is, now that they're under control, if and when Ukraine can launch a counterattack, they're going to have to go back through those positions that now Russia is occupying. Yes, they may be facing in not the best directions for things, but it may lower its efficiency and effectiveness, but it's not going to then be zero. So let's have a look on this today. And of course, we have Dashne. Now, this movement up here was being shown a couple of days ago by Suryak, and it's just saying more ground out Dashne, just to the south of where we see where that dam went down. And of course, just north of here in Slovyanka, Deep State Ukrainian map is showing that there is Russian advancement in this direction also. Now, we'll further move up Pokrovsk. We can see on 5 different axes here where Russia has made an advancement. I believe it's 1 axis. There's not going to be soldiers remaining down in here at this point in time. If there are, they have been surrounded. So this is probably 1 axis. It's probably 4. So Yasnove, Solone, Uzbenivkia, Pishani, and Zeleny. Now, showing that Russia has successfully then taken over the rail and roadway, one of these, into Pokrovsk. And I've seen many people saying Russia's not going to fight through Pokrovsk. They're going to bypass it and force Ukraine to withdraw out of here, because as soon as you get caught in an urban fight, you're going to have significant losses. So maybe that is the plan on this front. But there are some important updates right on this area. Now, we have said for a few months now, this coal plant is incredibly important. And so are, you can see the dirt spoils, some of like up here, some in Pokrovsk itself. These are incredibly important, but I believe it is this one right here, which is incredibly important to the Ukrainian economy of its coking coal, the ability to produce steel. And we get this today from the Kyiv Independent, quoting Reuters. Russian troops continue approaching the city of Pokrovsk. Ukraine halts the extraction of coking coal near the city. They've all stopped working now. There's no production there. They're only working on the surface. The mine produces coal for coke production needed in steel making, which is Ukraine's second largest export after agriculture. It's owned by this steelmaker here and was the only one in Ukraine producing coking coal. So it's the only one producing coking coal, but it's the second largest export, which is steel, after agriculture. This is incredibly significant. According to trade data, export of steel products totaled nearly $2 billion in the first 8 months of 2024. Ukrainian steelmakers could have produced up to 7.5 million metric tons of steel by the end of 2024. Losing Pokrovsk, however, could set back production to 2 to 3 million tons a year. So taking that down to a third to a quarter of what it may be, that is very significant when it's your second largest export. And it's also critical if the line gets drawn, the border gets redrawn behind this at some point, that Russia will occupy, of course, this incredibly important area and the resources that are there. So Russia will gain that and Ukraine will lose that if they can occupy it. And this is why I've said Ukraine may choose to collapse this mine on withdrawal if they withdraw out of here. So that is important to take into account. And this goes back to my thing of these are not just open, empty fields that are moving. It's fortified positions, it's critical resources, and of course, it's less and less leverage if there is negotiations in a week's time, which I don't think there's going to be, because I just don't believe either side is ready to come to the table. And I think that there's not enough cards on Ukraine's side to get a decent, even a reasonable deal at this point in time. And I don't think Trump will settle for that. But the alternative is years more fighting, tens, if not hundreds of thousands more killed, and no guarantee. There is no guarantee that things are going to improve. I think likely things are going to actually deteriorate. So maybe Trump's advisors are pushing him in that direction. We'll know in about a week. We can see Syriac maps. Look, he's showing a lot of similar updates here, but he's not showing that this road and train have come under control. I will say if the deep state is saying it, I agree that it has. But here is another critical update. So towards Malinivka, we've spoken about right where my cursor is, there is a major intersection. Where does this intersection go? Well, it comes from Pokrovsk, Minograd, all the way that leads then through Konstantinivka and down to Toretsk. And this has shown just some advancement in this axis. But on the Syriac maps, and I'll say Syriac is very reliable and corrects mistakes when he's incorrect, he's shown this, that the Russians have had advancement down this secondary road here to this intersection, effectively cutting it off. Russian army, one of the livestock complexes in northeast, they have, after 48 hours, reached this road. It's not confirmed the Russian forces were able to fully establish themselves there. It is certain they are still operating, which confirms that the Ukrainian army is no longer present in this section. So the connection between Pokrovsk, Konstantinivka has been cut through this road. This is very, very important that this is cut. And I believe if Russia do choose to bypass Pokrovsk, that Udashne is the first area which they'll want to get, and of course cutting off these roads and push on here, and this road being one of those other critical ones. But I don't believe there'll be any push to further go around Pokrovsk until Toretsk completely comes under Russian control, which depending on the map may have come under control today. So let's have a look at this before we move up into the north. So we see Toretsk. So what we can confirm is, was there Russian advancement in this direction? Absolutely yes, seen by this map. Now, soldiers operating down in here, likely that this has closed up. Now, what we see by Syriac maps, situation Toretsk front, during the last 2 days, Russian army took full control over the district Formica and the adjacent Tetikon. 98% of the city is now under Russian control. He's showing basically what the grey zone shows here as red zone. So again, we'll wait for this to be confirmed, but can we confirm there was advancement in then the north and the south? Well, we know in the north, potentially in the south. So this could be the kicker for further movements in and around Pokrovsk. So Toretsk, by Suryak maps, which the how reliable Suryak has been, I don't believe anything till there's multiple sources on it or photographic geolocated evidence, but it's looking that way. Move up into Chassiv Yar. Now, no changes shown on this map, of course. There were changes shown on yesterday's map. Some important things in here, though, is many different pages are reporting that Chassiv Yar's defences are currently crumbling. Remember, this is the last of the high ground, and it leads into lower ground, down into areas like Kramatorsk, Bakhmut, Chassiv Yar. That's where there's rolling hills, helps your artillery. This is a very critical area. So wait out on this axis. We may see more assets deployed in to further push on this front line. Chassiv Yar, after 8 days of combat, the Russian army took control over the refractory plant near the centre of the city. So down in this area. Now, I should say they took control back over it. I believe this was under control at one point, then came the Ukrainians had a successful push there, had it back under control. So I think this is going back and forward. But this, again, is one of those areas, but this isn't just open fields. If you look at the lay of the ground here, this is an incredibly important area. Now, no changes up in the northeast on any of the maps. But then I want to come into Volchansk and show just the sheer level of destruction up in here. But this tells us something as well that one of my followers, one of my friends on Telegram, all my friends are my followers, who has pointed out. So we see this footage of Volchansk, and this is what you get when you're firing TOS and 3,000 kilogram bombs fighting everywhere from hammers to everything, like hammer missiles, to FABs, is just complete devastation, absolutely nothing standing. And this is what we have said about areas like Seledov. These don't look like this, where we saw that grind through everything was looking like this at one point, and we get an idea of how fast things have moved through areas down in the south and the east, because it's not looking like this compared to then a year ago in the east, and things all looked like this, or up in the north where things are further. But this is what Varun here has pointed out. Why are people surprised? This is how Russians fight. They don't have to fight an insurgency. And this is one thing we have said is a pro, if you will, about protracted attritional war, is then it moves so slowly that those who will push back are either killed or leave. So when you occupy an area, the amount of behind the lines insurgencies or people that may act as like provocateurs behind the front line to target or call in targets or blow things up is greatly limited. And that's why we've seen much less of that later in the war in occupied territories than we saw in the beginning around Kherson. And this is why it may actually be easier for Russia to occupy these areas than if they took an area very quickly and everyone was remaining there. You've basically killed everyone physically or spiritually, so people have left because fuck this, I can't stay and leave, or physically, or the people remaining are on your side. So that's just what I wanted to point out there in Volchansk. So let's go over the gas. And of course we have yesterday and today, and between days it's even got a little bit more crazy. And we'll just add some more to this and we'll go over what Richard has said. But there's basically been a lot of online arguments between Robert Fico, of course the Prime Minister of Slovakia, and President Zelensky from Ukraine. That Slovakian president called Ukraine an unreliable partner and accused President Zelensky of blackmailing European leaders for support at a parliamentary meeting on January the 10th. He said Zelensky goes around Europe just begging and blackmailing others, asking for money. And many see that there's a lot of blackmail going on with turning off some of these taps and as well asking for a lot of money while we see the situation that is then deteriorating. Fico claimed that Zelensky disrupted gas transit agreement between Russia and Azerbaijan that would have benefited Slovakia. Kiev terminated Russian gas transit on January the 1st. As we saw, that's when those contracts finished. Fico said Slovakia could halt its humanitarian aid to Ukraine, cut or cancel social benefits for Ukrainian refugees, and cease emergency electricity supplies to Ukraine. He also suggested using Slovakia's veto power over EU decisions as leverage against Kyiv. It has to stop. He added that he was sometimes fed up with Zelensky. And this is one of the things, is, of course, Slovakia hold EU and NATO veto powers. That said, the majority of the other NATO and EU countries are not with Slovakia in this. So just because theoretically they can, doesn't mean that practically they can also. But they still hold a lot of power here, and there's sort of this blackmail going both ways, or at least holding things hostage. For Ukraine, holding then a gas hostage. For FICO, holding further support hostage as well. Oh my God, I keep saying FITSO. I keep reading it. That's the problem. He then described Russia as a reliable energy partner, stating Russia has never deceived us, unlike Ukraine. He also recalled the 2009 incident where he claimed Ukraine's leadership refused to supply Slovakia with gas during a crisis, referring to it as, quote, typical Ukrainians. So let's go over a little bit more here. And this is one person from FICO's party, which is the Young Social Democrats, and an open letter to Zelensky. Selfless assistance does not mean in any case that the state which is linked to this aid has the right to take action against the state which has shown willingness to help. Ukraine is not only criticising Slovakia, but the whole political West, including the US. The US is at the level of about 180 billion in aid. Zelensky says that only half was directed to Ukraine, the rest was used differently. Imagine the audacity that they got directly almost $100 billion. So he's saying that the audacity to call on this and say what is happening and criticise it when you've already got handed $100 billion. He even had the courage in the Subject podcast. In this context, he pointed out corruption on the part of his current most important partner. So pointing at corruption in the US, Slovakia has been helping Ukraine during the last year in accordance with the valid program declaration of the government. In practice, this means that only humanitarian and non-military and other non-military aid was directed to Ukraine. However, any help is the expression of selfless and voluntary solidarity, because we nor any other country in the EU and NATO actually has any obligation to help Ukraine from membership in these international organisations. Remembering, Ukraine is not in NATO or the EU. Are they on a path to membership? Potentially. They say irreversible path. I don't think there's irreversible path to anything unless anything is signed. The argument that a smaller volume of aid to Ukraine means denial of our membership was simply invented by opposition politicians. Zelensky can thank Slovakia, US and other states of the political West for any volume of assistance provided to Ukraine. I refuse to be part of a contest in which states to see who see who donates more. I refuse to see Ukraine take any aid for granted or for something that does not deserve any gratitude. And this is something we've seen the UK and Germany point at as well, is you still need to take not stuff for granted and show some gratitude as well. I think it was who's the knobhead with the fucking shit hair from the UK? My mind is failing me. You know exactly who I'm talking about. Who even he said, we've just handed you this money. You can't just move on and ask then for more. I have said that I think at this point in time, Zelensky is actually having a net negative effect on the informational space than a net positive. Maybe amongst, in echo chambers, but I think both in Ukraine and around the world actually at this point was net positive massively for the first few years. Now I think people are actually finding it really, really difficult with the constant of this, and this is where it's springing up in more conservative countries like Slovakia, or conservative compared to some of the other states in the EU. I refuse to let Ukraine take steps against the states that help as a reward for help. So you help us and it's like a reward. This procedure in gas transit was agreed with Ukraine at the highest level. Thanks to this agreement, no Russian but Slovakian gas would pass through Ukraine. So yeah, somewhat. If Ukraine ever wants to be part of the EU, we will demand reliability and adherence to agreements. It's not meant either wrong or good, it's thought to be rational. Again, this you'll hear, holding EU and NATO being like, we have veto power. If you want to be part of this, you have to be a good partner and sort of bend the knee to a degree. And that's happening both ways. We will not change opposition artificially created politicians, journalists or actors. Slovakia will continue to have a balanced approach on foreign policy. No member of the EU and NATO can do whatever they want if someone wants to be part of this society. He must follow the basic formal and informal rules. Otherwise, he's not ready. Full stop. And wherever and whenever this war ends, the EU and NATO is going to have a lot of friction, and a lot more friction, I believe, than before it. If there is division or even at worst breakup, this is a huge win for Xi and Putin. And some of these countries may then fall into the orbit of, say, Russia. In my opinion, in the modern times, you cannot be an independent sovereign country unless you're a major nuclear power. You have to be part of some alliance like NATO or BRICS, both economically and or militarily. And if these countries divide off, who is going to be the most likely geographically located partner that could supply some security, both economically, energy, and militarily? Of course, Zelensky has pushed back on this, and there's a bit of like Twitter beef going on. Of course, Fico is all on Facebook. It's good that Slovakia's Prime Minister Fico has finally returned from his vacation at a luxurious hotel in Vietnam and is now in Bratislava. For him personally, it must be challenging, switching from living in luxury to now trying to fix his own mistakes. So put a personal dig here. But I'll say, Zelensky, you live in a bit of luxury as well. It was an obvious mistake for Fico to believe that his shadowy schemes with Moscow could go on indefinitely. We offered our assistance to the people of Slovakia during their adaptation to the absence of Russian gas transit. We don't know the exact numbers on this. It was rumoured to be 500 million, but there has been Slovakian numbers come out and say, but it's going to cost in the billions. But Fico arrogantly refused. Many in Europe warned him that doing nothing and waiting was not an option. Now he's resorting to PR, lies, and loud accusations to shift blame away from himself onto someone else. What I'll say with this line, living in glass houses massively. The real problem is that he bet on Moscow, not his own country, not a united Europe, and certainly not on common sense. From the beginning, it was a losing bet. I don't think this. I don't see Fico or Orban as these buddies with Moscow. I think that they are nationalists. They want the best and the cheapest for their energy and their ability to remain competitive. But furthermore, that they don't want to ruin that relationship there with Moscow either, because where do you think that energy comes across from? But I also think, and this is going to become more and more relevant to the future, that they go, we put traditionalist values very highly, and we are more in line with those values maybe of the Kremlin around society than maybe that we're seeing in Western Europe. And we will turn maybe a blind eye to things if we have an energy and competitiveness around the world. That's how at least I see it. We hope that further diversification of energy sources in Europe, cooperation with the European Commission, and the implementation of President Trump's policy to increase American gas supplies to the continent will help address the challenges caused by the short-sightedness of certain European figures. But what we know is LNG that has to be put on a ship, pressurised, brought over, and then unliquefied, or however you do that, is significantly more expensive than just pushed across. But what this does is it makes Donald Trump very, very happy. And what does Zelensky need to do? He needs to try and make Donald Trump as happy as possible, especially when he's asking for more support. So before we go over what has become new of this, let's go over what, of course, Dr. Connolly has sent me across. Now, I've blanked at some of this, but it was just a personal message here. On the gas cutoff, my brief thoughts are as follows. 1. It was expected that both Moscow and Kyiv had been pretty clear for well over a year that the deal wouldn't be extended. They gave both sides time to plan. With Ukraine having to plan for less transit fees, approximately 1 to 2 billion annually, which will be replaced by rising taxes in Ukraine and foreign aid. And Russia has had time to think about how it would transport gas to Central European markets and still buy pipeline gas, such as Austria, Slovakia, and Hungary. 2. For Russia, if the gas does not find another way to market, it could lose around $6 to $8 billion in export revenues annually. That's export revenues, not taxes. So the pain will be felt by Gazprom rather than the Russian Ministry of Finance. This won't have much of an impact on Russia's ability to finance the war. So saying it's going to be more the private company, one of the biggest companies in the world, of Gazprom, not the Ministry of Finance itself, although these are somewhat interlinked, I believe. Number 3, but Russia will be looking to get its gas to market and is exploring other routes. Options include Slovakia buying gas in Russia, then sending it through Ukraine. This way, it could get the gas, and Ukraine could say that it was Slovakian gas transiting Ukraine, not Russian. And this is exactly what then one of the people in Robert Fico's party had said, that it is Slovakian gas. So if it's bought there, it's only piped across. No, it's Slovakian gas, or not then Russian gas. So it's bought in, so the Slovakians are buying it, they're moving it across, not buying it at the other end. Does that make sense? In a similar vein, the CEE, Central and Eastern Europe countries could buy Azerbaijani gas, which is then sent through Ukraine via Russia. In practice, it would be Russian molecules, but the contract between the CEE and Azerbaijan with Baku then form an agreement of its own with Moscow. These are effectively swap agreements. If no swap agreement is reached, expect tensions between Ukraine and the Central and Eastern European countries to rise. There are big changes in the Austrian government taking place and a lot of pro-Russian sentiments there. The same is true in Slovakia and Hungary. That's 3 EU states where clear shifts towards Moscow are underway. Well, Hungary has been in that position from the start. Slovakia has already warned that it will cut electricity supplies to Ukraine, a serious threat given the destruction of the Ukrainian energy grid by Russian attacks. Of course, Slovakia would lose some export revenues, but might see it as a price worth paying. 5. Russian gas still flows to Europe through the Turk Stream, a pipeline across the Black Sea through southeastern Europe, and in the form of LNG, of course, in ships. Russian exports, of which to Europe reached record levels in 2024. Number 6, European spot market gas prices rose in the first few days, reaching their highest level in 2 years, before dropping a little over the last few days. A long way off 2022 highs, but it's still much higher than the pre-war average. A prolonged cold snap could drive these prices higher. Hope that all makes sense. The energy dimension of the war is very interesting, as the West has tried to hit Russia there, but with mixed success. Happy to discuss in greater detail at a later point. Shadow Fleet, LNG projects, nuclear power plants, etc. So if you'd like me to go over this at length with Dr. Colony himself, please let me know. And the full podcast to this will be below. But like we have shared before, that short term, this may have an effect. Long term, it could actually backfire on Ukraine, because if the Nord Stream was to back up, if the pipelines that have been turned off running through Poland open back up, if Turk Stream can increase their flow capacity, and all that gas still flows into Eastern, Central, Western Europe, that all flows through. But what it has done is it has forced now a bypass of Ukraine, and that transit is gone. So short term, it may be positive. Long term, many have said Ukraine has actually shot themselves in the foot here and has forced themselves into buying then LNG at a much inflated price after the war. And I speak about this, and we have seen this from the German AfD party. Alice Weidel, sorry if that's incorrect. The AfD has its own candidate for Chancellor for the first time in its history. Now, we don't know if the AfD will get back in, but we are seeing, it sort of seems like Germany is getting the old crew back together. Now, what I will say, not bad for 45, but this is why you don't watch mainstream, you watch Willie. She has said, "We will put Nord Stream back into operation," which was met with applause. He also said, "When we're at the helm, we will tear down all the wind turbines. Down with these windmills of shame," which wind turbines, if you actually look at from the beginning resources to the energy out and then them being then bought down and bloody disposed of, they're not green energy at all. It's a fucking scam. She's correct about this. And, of course, put functioning nuclear power plants back online. Of course, Germany has turned off their nuclear power plants. So this, as we're seeing with many conservative governments, that go away from what is seen as green energy of windmills of shame, as she says, and resort to nuclear power, but also, of course, buying gas back from Russia through the destroyed Nord Stream pipeline that was blown up by we don't know who, but we would know who if it wasn't who we know it was. You know, I think I know that you know. She also threatened to restrict academic freedom. Should I say what we will do when we are charged? We'll close all gender studies and throw out all these professors. She complained at university in Germany we're being turned into a queer woke training grounds. Again, this resonates with a shitload of people that share this idea about universities and how academia is getting just watered and watered and watered down. Could be very, very popular. But let's focus on the gas. Nord Stream back opens Turk Stream. Ukraine could be left in the middle, buying much more expensive LNG or buying Russian gas after the war, piped back in, because I don't know if Russia's going to sign a deal. But we have some further developments on this. Robert Fico again on Facebook, an open letter to President Volodymyr Zelensky. Your decision to stop transit of gas through Ukraine towards Slovakia and other subscribers causes extensive damage to Ukraine itself, Slovakia, especially to the EU. It it provokes diverse reactions, which contributes neither to bilateral or multilateral relationships. Division here. I do not intend to respond to your statement on Sunday the 12th because I am not escalating the tension anymore. I want to concentrate fully on solving the situation related to gas transit stop. As the Prime Minister, I have different opinions in several areas as you presently. Above all, I do not believe in the strategy that the continuation of mutual bloodshed in the war in Ukraine leads to strengthening the position of Ukraine in possible peace negotiations. So basically saying is continuing this war, strengthening Ukraine's position at this point in time. And he's saying he doesn't agree with this. In all my foreign travels, I emphasise the need for an immediate end to fighting. I support existing peace plans and suggest that peace negotiations take place at any level in Slovakia. I also have a different opinion about your decision to stop the transit of gas through Ukraine. My attitude is not alone in Europe, although there may be some silent partners on this too, because if you stick your head up, if a nail sticks its head up, it'll get hammered back down. That's what we have seen of Robert Fico. Although I don't consider it completely decisive that the Slovak Republic loses. By stopping gas transit annually about 500 miles, the EU and most decisive influence on your decision about the competitiveness of the European Union, the organisation you are applying for. So Ukraine, he's saying Ukraine, you're applying for the EU and you are directly affecting our competitiveness. That we can veto this and it may not make people happy. But what does this do? It makes Trump very happy because they have to buy LNG. The price of gas has risen, therefore more cash flow. And I believe a lot of this is being done to impress Trump. But again, if gas is significantly expensive, more energy, then businesses can move offshore out of the EU where labour is already very expensive. In this spirit, I discussed with the relevant member of the European Commission, Commissioner of Energy, I won't try and pronounce this, and his team. Decisions at this meeting confirm the seriousness of the situation, and for this I appeal to Ukrainian side to actively participate in further negotiations in the work of separate working group created for this purpose. And in my opinion, though, the EU, the majority of the EU, are way further on Ukraine's side than their own member, than Slovakia or Robert Fico's side. Theoretically, Fico may be able to cut some of this, but in real life, the pressure that the other states can put on him is immense. Zelensky has responded back to this. Okay, come to Kyiv on Friday. So again, yes, 34,000 likes, reached 1.8 million people. I don't know here. I think many people are getting turned away from this. And I think from reading through the comments on Fico's post and how others are feeling about this, I think a lot of people are agreeing with Fico about this. And it's not that all the Slovakian people agree with Zelensky and they're all against Fico in a democratic country. But yeah, it's awfully unpopular. Okay. So we will see where, remember, the front line is only one war here. You have the frontline war, you have the hybrid war, which everyone is participating in, even though they say we're not participating in the war, everyone is involved in the hybrid war. We have the energy war, and then we have even the informational war, and all of these are incredibly important for winning a war or having a better outcome in the war. I don't think we'll see a winner, if that makes sense. If the EU were to divide, even if one country leaves the EU and NATO, I would see that as a huge victory, further than even occupying territory, because it weakens the state of these. Now, North Korean troops, something we have spoken about, something we have said, we think it's very likely, but as far as concrete evidence, it's been very, very limited. And Ukraine has said, Zelensky has said, that over 3,800 have been killed or wounded in action. And we have said, well, where is the evidence of this? And it was very convenient when it was said, no one was then alive. Of that amount, even if 1% was then, of course, captured, POW, it would still be large numbers, as in the tens still. Ukrainian Defence Force have captured the first North Korean servicemen who fight for the Russians in the Kursk region. This is from the SBU. We've received indisputable evidence of the DPRK's participation in Russia's war against our country. We're talking about 2 North Korean soldiers, one of whom was captured on the 9th by Special Operations and another by paratroopers. Immediately after being captured, the foreigners were provided with necessary care and stipulated by the Geneva Convention. Remember, the Geneva Convention is very specific about then looking after POWs, but also It's a little bit more grey around posting photographs. And of course, there's interviews with these POWs, which in my reading of the Geneva Convention, POWs cannot be used for any sort of propaganda. Now, is this in public, where this gets grey, is this in public interest of information, or is this propaganda? And it's a bit of column A, a bit of column B, so it's hard to know if this is seen completely to Geneva or just the medical care as Geneva. It's hard to know. What we do know is both sides use POWs massively as propaganda tools. The POWs do not speak Ukrainian, English, or Russian. No capital here. The communication with them is carried out through interpreters of Korean cooperation with South Korean NIS, their intelligence service. Time of capture, the foreigners had Russian military ID issued for the time of another person with the registration of Republic of Tuva in the Russian Federation. The other had no documents at all. So this is one of the things. The ID given is from the Republic of Tuva, who are very Asian. Well, they are Asian people. They look Asian too. That's where it's so hard. That's why many are saying that this is still bullshit. At this point in time, I don't fucking know. With the amount that claim to have been killed, wounded, there should be massively indisputable evidence of this. I think it's very likely they're fighting there. I think it's very likely these North Koreans. Is it beyond reasonable doubt? Is it beyond some doubt? I'll leave that up to you. Now, the prisoner of war confirmed the testimony of their fellow soldier. He gave some of the answers in writing because he had an injured jaw. So he had an injured jaw, couldn't speak, so he had to then deliver the answers in writing, of course. This is all convenient. It's fucking hard to know, but I'll share from one of my guys. And of course, we see this image. Communication was carried out through interpreters in Korean cooperation with South Korean intelligence services. But one of my guys said, quick thoughts on the ghosts of Pyongyang, of course, the North Korean soldiers. I refused to listen to the rumours until I heard about DPRK POWs through my own network. If they're providing intelligence about Russia or North Korea, and frankly, I expect a lot of interested parties are cutting them some pretty sweet deals for intelligence. We've never seen their faces for obvious reasons until maybe this. And while I'm not certain on their return policy for North Korean captives, I remember the USSR was quite harsh on its own who ended up in Nazi POW camps. A lack of patriotism or other offences saw them knocked off, sent to labour camps or otherwise punished. I can imagine a similar outcome for North Korean POWs, so I imagine those in captivities are aware of this and cutting deals. And of course, South Koreans, Americans, Ukrainians, many parties here, as my contact here points out, are very interested in the intelligence that they could be given, but with their face being known or even a swap back, that limits all of this and going back to North Korea. So we don't know. And I don't believe these guys would want to show their faces for their families and what may happen in a military dictatorship like North Korea. So again, this is all still up in the air, but it will become more and more known over time. Legends, you have a fantastic day. Look after yourselves, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.